I stared at my phone as another furious text from my sister Sarah lit up the screen. The irony was not lost on me that, on the day I announced my engagement, my own family was exploding with rage because they were not invited to witness my happiness. 5 years ago, Sarah had looked me straight in the eye and said those words that changed everything. "You are just not wedding material." Well, here I am, Bethany, 28 years old, a marketing coordinator from Portland, Oregon, and I had just proven her spectacularly wrong. But let me take you back to where this family drama really started. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my entire family, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And if you have ever felt like the black sheep in your family, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself. Now, let me take you back to where this all started. Growing up in the Thompson family meant understanding your place in a very specific hierarchy. My father, Timothy, owned a successful car dealership in suburban Denver, Colorado, and my mother, Margaret, dedicated her life to maintaining our picture-perfect home. My older sister, Sarah, 3 years my senior, followed the expected path by becoming an elementary school teacher, while my younger brother, David, 2 years behind me, pursued engineering with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else in his life. Then there was me. From childhood, I gravitated toward art creativity, and anything that involved thinking outside the conventional boxes my family seemed to worship. While Sarah organized her dollhouse with military precision, and David built elaborate Lego structures, I painted abstract murals on my bedroom walls and wrote poetry in spiral notebooks. My parents tolerated these quirks as childhood phases, confident I would eventually mature into something more respectable. When college applications came around, the family expectations became crystal clear. Margaret suggested education like Sarah, while Timothy pushed business administration. When I declared my major as fine arts with a focus on marketing and design, the dinner table conversations grew noticeably cooler. Sarah would make comments about practical careers, while David questioned the earning potential of creative fields. I graduated with honors, landed my marketing coordinator position, and thought I had proven my worth. I was wrong. My dating life became another source of family disappointment. The few boyfriends I brought home never quite measured up to their standards. Jake, the freelance photographer, was deemed unreliable because of his unconventional schedule. Marcus, my college boyfriend who worked at a nonprofit, was idealistic but impractical. Even when I dated Tom, an accountant I thought would win their approval, Margaret found fault with his family background, and Sarah questioned his long-term prospects. Eventually, I stopped bringing anyone home altogether. The first real crack in our family foundation appeared when my cousin Emily announced her engagement to Bradford, a banker from one of Denver's most affluent families. Emily, my father's brother's daughter, had always been the golden child of our extended family. She possessed that effortless grace my mother admired and the social connections my father respected. When the engagement celebration was held at my parents' house, I was genuinely excited to be part of the planning process. I volunteered to help with everything from bridal shower planning to wedding coordination. I had ideas for unique decorations, creative invitation designs, and personalized touches that would make Emily's day special. But my enthusiasm was met with polite deflection and increasingly obvious exclusions. When I suggested designing custom wedding favors using my graphic design skills, Sarah interrupted with, "Oh, honey, I do not think you would fit in with Emily's crowd. They are very traditional." Margaret nodded in agreement, adding, "Maybe you could help with other things, Beth, something more behind the scenes." The other things turned out to be addressing envelopes and organizing seating charts, while Sarah took charge of the actual creative decisions. When I showed up to the bridal dress shopping expedition I thought I was invited to, I discovered they had changed the date without telling me. Sarah explained it was just immediate bridal party, even though Emily's college roommate, whom none of us had met before that month, was trying on dresses alongside the others. The official exclusion came 3 weeks before the wedding. Emily called to explain that they were keeping the bridal party simple with just Sarah as matron of honor and 2 of Emily's sorority sisters as bridesmaids. I was hurt, but tried to be supportive, offering to handle any last-minute details they might need. Instead, I found myself assigned to manage the guest book table, positioned near the entrance where I could greet people but remain separate from the wedding party festivities. On Emily's wedding day, I watched from my designated table as photographers captured endless family portraits that somehow never included me. When dinner was served, I discovered my place card located me at a table with distant relatives I barely knew, while my immediate family sat at the head table with the wedding party. The message was unmistakably clear. I was an obligation, not an honored guest. The final blow came during the reception, when Sarah approached, my table wineglass in hand, and satisfaction written across her face. "See," she said, gesturing toward the elegant affair unfolding around us. "Everything went perfectly without any complications." Her emphasis on the word complications left no doubt about her meaning. As I drove home that night, still wearing the conservative dress Margaret had insisted I purchase specifically for the occasion, I realized something fundamental had shifted. My family did not just see me as different, they saw me as an embarrassment. 6 months after Emily's wedding, David announced his engagement to Jessica, a corporate lawyer from a prominent Southern family. Despite the previous disappointment, I felt hopeful about being included in my brother's wedding planning. David had always been more accepting of my creative pursuits, and I foolishly believed our sibling bond would override family politics. Jessica's family brought old money sophistication and social expectations that made Emily's banker fiancé look casual by comparison. Their engagement party was held at an exclusive country club, and the guest list read like a who's who of Denver's professional elite. I attended wearing my most conservative outfit, determined to prove I could navigate these social waters successfully. But even my careful preparation could not overcome the growing family narrative about my inappropriateness for formal occasions. The planning meetings for David's wedding initially included me, but my role gradually diminished with each gathering. When venue selection discussions began, my suggestions were politely noted and quickly dismissed. When the conversation turned to catering, Margaret would redirect my opinions toward Jessica's preferences. It became clear that my input was tolerated rather than valued, and the real decisions were being made in smaller meetings I was not invited to attend. The breaking point came when David requested a private conversation with me 3 months before his wedding. He explained with obvious discomfort that there had been extensive discussions about the wedding party composition. Jessica's family had certain expectations about the formality and tone of the ceremony, and they felt it was important to maintain a specific aesthetic for photographs and the overall event presentation. "It is not personal, Beth," David assured me, his engineer's mind approaching this like a problem to be solved efficiently. "But Jessica's family has certain expectations, and we want everything to go smoothly." When I pressed for specific details about what made me unsuitable, he hesitated before admitting that Sarah had voiced concerns about my ability to handle the social aspects of an upscale wedding. Margaret apparently had supported these concerns during family discussions I knew nothing about. Instead of a bridesmaid role, I was assigned to manage the guest book exactly as I had been at Emily's wedding. The parallel was too obvious to ignore, and when I discovered that Jessica barely knew some of the bridesmaids she had chosen over me, the intentional nature of my exclusion became undeniable. The bridal party included Jessica's sister, her law school roommate, and 2 sorority sisters, none of whom had spent more than a few hours in my presence. The shopping trip for bridesmaid dresses happened without me, though I only learned about it when Sarah mentioned the beautiful gowns they had selected. When I asked why I was not invited since I was part of the wedding, Sarah explained that it was just for the actual bridal party and that my presence might have made the other girls uncomfortable since I was not really part of their group. That evening, I overheard a phone conversation between Margaret and my aunt discussing Beth's situation. Margaret spoke in hushed tones about how some people were just not suited for certain social environments and how important it was to protect David and Jessica from any potential awkwardness on their special day. The word protect echoed in my mind long after the conversation ended. The final confrontation came when I directly asked Sarah why I was consistently excluded from meaningful roles in family celebrations. Her response was brutally honest. In a way I had not expected. "You are just not wedding material, Beth. You do not understand these formal events the way the rest of us do." She detailed my perceived shortcomings with surgical precision, from my clothing choices to my social skills to my career status as a marketing coordinator rather than something more prestigious. When I protested that marketing was a respected profession, Sarah laughed dismissively. "It is fine for everyday life, but when we are talking about events like this, people notice these things. David is an engineer, I am a teacher. These are solid, respectable careers that people understand. Your job is just too creative, too unconventional for these kinds of gatherings." Margaret entered the conversation at that moment and, instead of defending me, reinforced Sarah's position. "Honey," she said with the patronizing tone she reserved for explaining difficult concepts, "some people just are not meant for these kinds of social situations. It is not a criticism, it is just recognizing different strengths." The implication was clear. My strengths, whatever they might be, were not appropriate for the occasions my family deemed important. I attended David's wedding as a peripheral guest, stationed at my guest book table, watching another perfect family celebration unfold without my meaningful participation. The photographs from that day show a beautiful, cohesive wedding party, with Jessica's elegant bridesmaids flanking the couple while I remain invisible behind my assigned table. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If my family wanted to treat me like an outsider, I would show them what being excluded really felt like. 3 months after David's wedding, I met Marcus at a gallery opening featuring local Portland artists. I had driven up from Denver for a long weekend, needing space to process my family situation, when I literally bumped into him while studying a particularly striking abstract painting. Marcus, a software developer who had relocated from Boston, possessed an immediate warmth and genuine curiosity about my thoughts on the artwork that caught me completely off guard. Our conversation flowed naturally from art appreciation to travel stories, career aspirations, and family backgrounds. When I cautiously mentioned my family's disapproval of my creative pursuits, Marcus looked genuinely confused. "But your marketing work combines analytical thinking with creative problem solving," he said. "That is exactly the kind of innovative approach most companies desperately need." His perspective was so different from my family's dismissive attitude that I almost wondered if we were discussing the same career. Over the following months, our relationship developed through weekend visits, long phone conversations, and eventually my relocation to Portland for a senior marketing position Marcus had helped me discover. What struck me most about Marcus was not just his acceptance of my interests, but his active encouragement of them. When I mentioned wanting to take pottery classes, he researched studios and signed up with me. When I talked about freelance design projects, he offered to help with the business development aspects. Meeting Marcus's family during Thanksgiving was a revelation that left me emotionally overwhelmed. His parents, Eleanor and Richard, owned a successful consulting firm, but approached wealth with a casualness my family would never understand. Eleanor immediately wanted to know about my work, not to judge its social acceptability, but because she was genuinely interested in marketing strategies for creative industries. Richard shared stories about his own unconventional career path and the resistance he had faced from traditional business circles. During that weekend, I experienced something I had never felt in my own family: unconditional acceptance. When I accidentally spilled wine on Eleanor's white tablecloth, she laughed and said it gave the fabric character. When Marcus's younger sister asked about my family, and I hesitantly explained our complicated dynamics, nobody suggested I should try harder to fit in. Instead, they expressed sympathy for what they recognized as my family's loss. The contrast became even more apparent during Christmas when Marcus joined me for a brief visit to Denver. My family's reception was polite but cool, with Timothy asking pointed questions about Marcus's long-term financial prospects and Margaret making subtle comments about his casual dress style. Sarah spent the evening explaining Denver social customs as if Marcus might be confused by basic etiquette, while David questioned his software company's stability compared to more traditional engineering firms. Marcus handled their interrogation with grace, but afterward he was quiet during our drive back to the hotel. "They do not see you the way you actually are," he finally said. "They have this narrow definition of success and appropriateness that does not make room for someone as talented and creative as you." His observation was not accusatory, just sad, and it crystallized something I had been struggling to articulate for years. 6 months later, Marcus proposed during a weekend trip to the Portland Japanese garden. He had arranged for us to have a private moment in the tea garden where he presented a ring he had designed himself, incorporating elements that reflected my love of artistic detail and unconventional beauty. The ring was perfect, but what moved me most was his proposal speech, which focused not on changing me or fitting me into some predetermined role, but on celebrating exactly who I already was. As we planned our engagement celebration, Marcus casually mentioned his substantial trust fund, something he had downplayed during our relationship. "I want our wedding to be everything you have ever dreamed of," he said. "Money should never be a limitation on our happiness." For the first time in my life, I had the resources to create the kind of celebration I had always envisioned without compromising my vision to accommodate someone else's expectations. The venue selection process led us to a historic mansion in Napa Valley that typically booked years in advance. Marcus's family connections and willingness to pay premium rates secured us a date just 8 months away during peak wedding season. The estate featured sprawling gardens, elegant architecture, and amenities that would create the kind of sophisticated celebration my family claimed I could never manage. As we worked with our wedding planner to develop our guest list, Marcus noticed my hesitation when we reached my immediate family members. "What are you thinking?" he asked, recognizing my internal struggle. I explained the years of exclusions, the dismissive comments, and the consistent message that I was not sophisticated enough for elegant celebrations. "So, what do you want to do?" Marcus asked simply. The question hung in the air because nobody had ever asked me that before when it came to family events. I had always been told what my role would be, what I could contribute, and what limitations I needed to accept. Now, for the first time, I had complete control over my own celebration. That night, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I would invite every single member of my extended family, every cousin, aunt, uncle, and family friend who had been present at Emily's and David's weddings, but I would not include Sarah, Margaret, Timothy, or David. They would learn about my wedding the same way I had learned about their exclusive planning meetings through other people's conversations and social media posts. The invitations went out 6 weeks before the wedding hand, addressed in elegant calligraphy and featuring custom designs I had created myself. Each envelope contained a beautiful cardstock invitation to what was clearly going to be an expensive, sophisticated celebration. The guest list included my parents' siblings, their children, longtime family friends, and even some of my parents' neighbors who had watched me grow up. As the RSVPs began arriving, my extended family started calling to express their excitement and ask questions about my fiancé and our plans. Several cousins mentioned how surprised they were that my immediate family had not mentioned my engagement during recent conversations. Aunt Linda called specifically to say how proud she was of the beautiful life I had built for myself, and how excited she was to finally meet the man who made me so happy. The explosion came exactly 3 weeks before the wedding, when enough family members had mentioned their invitations that my parents could no longer ignore the obvious exclusion. Timothy called first, his voice tight with confusion and anger. "Beth, I think there has been some mistake with the invitations. We have not received ours yet, and people keep asking us about details we do not know." I had practiced this conversation in my mind dozens of times, but hearing his voice still made my heart race. "There is no mistake, Dad," I said calmly. "This is exactly what selective guest list management looks like." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only when he began demanding explanations I was no longer interested in providing. The morning of my wedding dawned with perfect California sunshine streaming across the Napa Valley estate. 150 guests would witness my marriage to Marcus, including virtually everyone who mattered from my extended family and social circles. The only notable absences were the 4 people who had spent years telling me I was not sophisticated enough for elegant celebrations. Eleanor and Richard had flown in early to help with final preparations, treating me with the maternal and paternal support I had always craved. Eleanor spent the morning helping me into my custom-designed gown while sharing stories about her own wedding day, making me feel like the treasured daughter I had never been allowed to be. Richard walked the grounds with Marcus, discussing everything from business ventures to travel plans, offering the kind of mentoring relationship I watched my brother enjoy with our father. My bridal party consisted of 3 college friends who had remained loyal, despite my family's dismissive attitude toward my chosen profession, plus Marcus's sister, who had insisted on being included after witnessing how his family had embraced me. These women understood my journey and celebrated my happiness without reservation, creating the supportive atmosphere I had always imagined wedding mornings should include. The ceremony itself exceeded every expectation I had harbored for my perfect wedding day. The historic mansion provided a stunning backdrop, while the gardens offered intimate spaces for photographs that captured genuine joy rather than obligatory poses. My cousins served as ushers, family friends, read meaningful passages during the service, and my uncle Timothy walked me down the aisle after my father declined to attend. As I exchanged vows with Marcus in front of people who genuinely celebrated our love, I felt a peace I had never experienced at family gatherings. Nobody was evaluating my dress choice, criticizing my behavior, or questioning whether I belonged in this beautiful setting. Instead, I was surrounded by love, support, and recognition of the life I had built through my own choices and efforts. The reception featured a jazz trio, gourmet cuisine, and dancing that continued well past midnight. My extended family mingled easily with Marcus's Boston relatives and our Portland friends, creating the kind of warm, inclusive atmosphere that made everyone feel valued. Aunt Linda gave a toast about watching me grow into a strong, independent woman who had never compromised her authentic self for anyone else's comfort. Throughout the evening, my phone buzzed consistently with text messages from my immediate family members. Sarah sent multiple messages, ranging from hurt confusion to outright anger. "How could you embarrass us like this in front of the entire family?" Margaret's texts focused on disappointment and betrayal. This is unforgivable behavior that has torn our family apart. Timothy demanded explanations. You owe us a conversation about this vindictive decision. David surprisingly sent only one message. I am beginning to understand some things I never saw before. I had given my phone to Marcus early in the evening, asking him to monitor any emergency calls while keeping the family drama away from our celebration. He occasionally showed me particularly ridiculous messages, and we would share a quiet laugh before returning to our guests. The contrast was stark. While my chosen family celebrated our happiness, my biological family focused entirely on their own wounded feelings. The photography captured everything beautifully, from the intimate ceremony moments to the exuberant reception dancing. When the professional photos were posted on social media the following week, they told the story of a sophisticated, joyful celebration that included beloved family members and lifelong friends. The obvious absence of my immediate family became a talking point among our broader social circle, with many people expressing surprise that such a beautiful event had not included my parents and siblings. Extended family members who attended began reaching out individually to express their confusion about the family dynamics they had witnessed. Cousin Emily, whose wedding had started this entire journey, called to apologize for not including me more meaningfully in her celebration. She admitted that she had been influenced by my immediate family's suggestions about keeping things simple, but seeing my wedding made her realize how wrong those decisions had been. The ripple effects continued for weeks as family members processed what they had observed. Several relatives mentioned that they had always wondered about the family dynamics, but had never felt comfortable questioning them directly. My wedding had illuminated patterns of exclusion and judgment that extended beyond just my experiences, and people were beginning to examine their own complicity in maintaining those patterns. The week following our wedding, my parents demanded an in-person meeting to discuss what Margaret called this unprecedented breach of family loyalty. Marcus and I agreed to meet them at a neutral restaurant where the public setting would presumably encourage civil conversation. Instead, the encounter became an emotional confrontation that clarified just how fundamentally our perspectives differed. Margaret arrived with red eyes and a wounded expression that suggested she viewed herself as the victim of my decisions. "How could you do this to your own family?" she asked, before we had even ordered drinks. "We raised you, supported you, loved you, and this is how you repay us." Her narrative completely ignored the years of exclusion and dismissive treatment that had led to this moment. Sarah's anger was more direct and accusatory. "You are selfish and vindictive," she declared, her teacher's voice carrying across several nearby tables. "You planned this whole thing just to hurt us and embarrass us in front of everyone we know." When I attempted to explain the parallel between my wedding choices and their treatment of me at family events, she dismissed the comparison as irrelevant. Timothy focused on practical concerns, demanding to know how I expected to maintain family relationships after such a public rejection. "You have made your point," he said, "but now we need to figure out how to move forward without this hanging over every future gathering." His assumption that I wanted to return to previous family dynamics showed how little he understood about my motivations. David's response surprised everyone, including me. "I need to ask you all something," he said, addressing our parents and Sarah directly. "When was the last time any of us included Beth in meaningful decisions about family celebrations?" The question hung in the air uncomfortably, and when nobody immediately answered, David continued. "Because I am starting to realize that we have been treating her like an outsider for years." I explained calmly that my wedding choices were not about revenge or vindictiveness, but about creating the kind of celebration where I felt valued and respected. "I learned from the best teachers about selective inclusion," I said. Every family event for the past 5 years has shown me exactly how it feels to be considered an obligation rather than an honored guest. The conversation ended without resolution, but it marked the beginning of a period of reflection that would eventually reshape our family dynamics. Marcus and I returned to Portland, where we focused on building our marriage and careers without the constant undercurrent of family disapproval that had shadowed my previous relationships. Over the following months, I discovered the freedom that comes from setting clear boundaries with people who consistently undervalue your worth. Instead of dreading family phone calls filled with subtle criticism, I experienced peaceful weekends where my choices were not subject to external judgment. My career flourished as I gained confidence in my professional abilities, earning a promotion to senior marketing director within 6 months of returning from my wedding. The healing process involved both individual reflection and couples therapy with Marcus, where we explored healthy relationship patterns and communication strategies. I began to understand how my family's treatment had affected my self-esteem and decision-making processes, while also learning to recognize my own worth independent of their approval. Reconnecting with extended family members who had attended our wedding provided unexpected emotional support. These relatives shared their own experiences with family dynamics and offered perspectives I had never considered. Several cousins admitted they had always admired my independence, but had been afraid to voice support when my immediate family criticized my choices. 6 months after our wedding, Sarah called to request a private conversation. She had spent considerable time reflecting on David's questions about family inclusion patterns, and she wanted to acknowledge that their treatment of me had been unfair. "I always thought we were protecting family events from potential complications," she admitted, "but I realize now that we were the ones creating problems by excluding you." Her apology was genuine but limited. While she recognized the pattern of exclusion, she still struggled to understand how their behavior had felt from my perspective. Margaret and Timothy remained convinced that my wedding decisions were disproportionately harsh, though they eventually agreed to maintain respectful contact during major holidays. The new family dynamic involved significantly less frequent contact, but much more authentic communication. When we did gather for holidays, conversations focused on current events and shared interests rather than judgments about lifestyle choices. I no longer felt obligated to justify my career, my husband, or my decisions to people who had proven incapable of supporting them. Marcus's family became my primary source of familial support, offering the unconditional acceptance and encouragement I had always craved. Eleanor and Richard treated me like their own daughter, celebrating my professional achievements and personal growth with genuine enthusiasm. Their approach to family relationships modeled the kind of love I wanted to cultivate in my own marriage. Looking back on that transformative period, I realized that my wedding was not really about revenge or proving a point to my family. It was about finally prioritizing my own happiness and surrounding myself with people who celebrated rather than merely tolerated my authentic self. Sometimes the people who should love you unconditionally are the ones who make you feel most conditional about their affection. I learned that family is not just about blood relationships or shared history, but about acceptance, support, and genuine love that does not require you to diminish yourself for other people's comfort. When I stopped trying to fit into their narrow definition of appropriate behavior, I found my own definition of happiness and success. The most important lesson was understanding that my worth was never determined by their comfort level with who I am. The family members who truly mattered found ways to love and support me regardless of whether I met their preconceived expectations. Those relationships grew stronger through authentic communication and mutual respect. And sometimes the best response to years of exclusion is not anger or resentment, but simply living beautifully without needing anyone's permission to be yourself. If you are watching this and feeling like you do not quite fit your family's mold, Remember that your happiness matters more than their comfort with your choices. What would you do if your family consistently excluded you from important celebrations? Have you ever had to choose between family harmony and your own self-respect? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their worth is not determined by other people's acceptance. Thank you for joining me today, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is show people the natural consequences of their choices. I hope you find the courage to prioritize your own happiness just like you deserve.